Hello, I'm Esther Gitu Ewart. It's Tuesday, November 8th. This is Africa 54.
Control of the U.S. Congress is in the hands of voters today, with the number of contests tight. VOA's Catherine Gypson reports from the battleground southeastern state of Georgia. African leaders are speaking assertively at the ongoing COP27 Climate Conference in Egypt, wanting help from major economic powers to help them deal with droughts, floods, and resulting hunger. The world's weather has become increasingly powerful and devastating in recent years, and its negative impact on human health is growing. We'll go into details. All this and much more on today's Africa 54.
It is midterm election day in the United States. The balance of power in Congress is at stake as voters decide whether Democrats will continue to hold the majority in the Senate and House, either delivering a boost for Joe Biden's presidency on shifting power to Republicans. The U.S. congressional correspondent Catherine Gypson reports from one of the key places in election 2022, the southern state of Georgia.
Open the border.
From Pennsylvania to Ohio, Nevada to New Hampshire, candidates making the final push in campaigns that will decide the direction of the United States for the next 2 years. And in the key state of Georgia, the day beginning with a prayer.
This election season, Lord, I pray.
And a warning from Republican Senate candidate Herschel Walker.
We got to get it right, because if we don't get it right, we won't recognize this country tomorrow.
Walker's supporters frustrated with President Joe Biden.
After all what Democrats have done, I just can't sit back and allow the country to just fall behind. The border crisis is out of control, and it doesn't appear that Joe Biden's going to do anything about it.
In a recent Pew Research Center poll, more than 3/4 of U.S. voters surveyed said the economy was their top concern this election.
The housing market, the price of gas, you're noticing in the grocery stores, food is very, very expensive, and there's items that you can't even find anymore.
Because democracy itself is on the ballot. We got to show up tomorrow.
Walker's opponent, Senator Raphael Warnock, won a runoff election in January 2021 that gave Democrats control of the U.S. Senate and the ability to enact Biden's agenda.
The economy is the #1 issue for me, and I think that the Democratic Party and Senator Warnock in particular really kind of focus on the everyday issues of everyday Americans. The Republicans like to talk about the stock market and everything.
And after the U.S. Supreme Court decision in June ending the federal right to abortion, social issues have also motivated female and independent voters to vote for Democrats.
That's very concerning to me. I think everybody should have access to health care, whether what your personal views are on Roe v. Wade or abortion.
What size you need, baby?
Voters here in Georgia are key in deciding control of the U.S. Senate. This is just one of a handful of races nationwide that are still too close to call and will give either party a narrow majority. All 435 U.S. House seats are also up for re-election, with most polls showing Republicans will take control. Catherine Gypson, VOA News, Macon, Georgia.
Joining me now from a polling station in Arlington, Virginia is VOA's Heidi Adams. Hello, Heidi. There are several hotly contested races in Virginia. What is the turnout like in Arlington?
Well, Esther, we've been seeing a steady flow of voters coming in and out here, casting their votes. Remember, these are people who have decided that on election day, they will come out in person and, of course, cast their ballots here. North of 40 million Americans have already cast their votes because in this country, you can vote early by mail or simply drop your ballot in a nearby ballot box. So that's another avenue for people who have come out to vote. Look, it's lost on no one here what is at stake. The Republicans have been driving home this message that high inflation, high crime and a crisis of immigration at the southern border is at stake. They say the Democrats have failed on all of these scores and that a sea change is in order. The Democrats, on the other hand, as President Biden reiterated in a very important speech a few days ago, he says American democracy is at stake, hoping that voters will remember what happened on January 6th and those supporters of former President Donald Trump, sort of the MAGA wing, were involved in that. And they're also saying that abortion is on the ballot. And they're hoping that voters will remember the legislative successes of the Democrats. And it will be interesting to see if voters do indeed reward or reject President Biden and the Democrats. These midterm elections are usually a referendum on the president and the party in power. But many on the Republican side also see these 2022 midterm elections as a sort of starting gun for the 2024 presidential election.
You know, Heidi, we know that the Democrats right now have a slim majority at the Congress. Now, if Republicans take control of the Congress, what would be the implications internationally and domestically?
Indeed, Esther, look, Republicans only need to win control of one of the chambers of Congress, not to mention two, to really cause problems for President Biden. And another big change that we will see is that Nancy Pelosi will, if the Republicans take control of Congress, Nancy Pelosi will no longer be Speaker of the House. She will no longer be the House Majority Leader, and she will no longer be second in line to the U.S. presidency. Those roles will fall onto Kevin McCarthy from the Republican side. And he has said that on day one, he will make immigration a priority. That's the issue, one of the many issues that will be in the Republicans' crosshairs. And of course, as we said, the Republicans are bent on really making things difficult for President Biden. They say there's the issues they've wanted to tackle for a long time, but they can also open investigations into President Biden, into his family. They can open investigations into senior members of the White House. And there is also talk that Republicans might want to impeach President Biden. So there are very interesting times ahead. It will be interesting to see if Democrats have made their case to voters, if they can keep control, because there's a lot more at stake than just U.S. domestic policy. It will also affect President Biden's ability to make good on commitments that he's made to other countries outside of the United States, especially in Africa as well. And if Republicans are controlling where and when America spends its money, it'll be interesting to see if the president can indeed put his money where his mouth is.
Heidi, excellent reporting. VOA's Heidi Adams reporting live from Arlington, Virginia. More now on the U.S. midterm elections. VOA's Yahez Wuhib, host of Africa News Tonight, spoke to journalist and analyst Paul Matibe about the significance of the elections and issues of interest to Africa.
We have seen in many countries in Africa, right, and we will see over the next year, for example, there are many countries in Africa who are going to be having their own elections, right? Already this month, Equatorial Guinea is having a general election. In February next year, Nigeria is having a general election. When we come to March next year, Mali is having a referendum. Sudan, Syria, and Sierra Leone in June and July. Zimbabwe is having an election next year, and many other countries, right? And so often in African elections, you find that they have external observers who come and observe their own elections. But the United States does also invite observers. But now, why is this important to Africans, and why should Africa care? The thing is that at the moment, if you're taking a look at the lawmaking body, Congress, right? The Democrats have a majority, but their majority has currently been raised thin. They've been on a 50-50 split, and Vice President Kamala Harris has been the tie-breaking vote in Congress. And as you can see in the previous administration with former President Donald Trump, certain policies towards Africa would have taken a slightly certain stance, if you will, and President Biden has his own agenda and has also just recently released his Sub-Saharan Africa strategy. So what does this mean? If President Biden's political party, which is the Democratic Party, if they lose control of either the House, and in particular if they lose control of the Senate, that means that for the remainder of President Biden's term, the next 2 years, he will find it very difficult to complete his agenda, which would, which may also include certain things pertaining to Africa. As we saw under President Trump, there were certain things like, for example, in Somalia, there was the withdrawal of the troops in Somalia, for example. President Trump himself did not visit Africa, for example, but we have seen Secretary Blinken come to Africa, and since the Russia-Ukraine war, we have seen an increase by threefold of senior, very high-ranking Biden administration officials who have been making trips to Africa.
Now, for more perspective on the U.S. midterm elections, I'm joined by Steve Reddish, VOA News Center executive producer. Steve, if there is a major power shift from Democrats to Republicans, how will that affect the continent of Africa?
In a couple of ways. The Biden administration policy itself won't change much from the 2022 Africa strategy that was outlined earlier this year. But if Republicans take control, immigration is one area where they will exert their control as members of Congress. Any attempt by the White House to change immigration, to reform immigration laws, to bring more people in will be met by fierce opposition by a Republican Congress. Another area, foreign aid. While cuts may not come, but certainly restrictions on how the money would be spent would be determined by a Republican legislature and compromise by the president in order to get the budget and get the money out.
And how central is the Roe versus Wade issue in this election?
Democrats see this as an energizing issue to get women and young men actually out to the polls. Most Americans support a woman's right to get an abortion. And Democrats have been pounding that issue all through the election, the run-up to the election in commercials. Many Democrats have used it. Some Democrats feel that they haven't covered the economy well enough and addressed economic issues versus the abortion issue. But Democrats see this as one of the defining issues and one of the reasons that they would win if they do win.
And let's look at both parties. What are they pinning their hope on in this vote? To start with the Republicans.
Republicans are hoping that people who feel the economy pinch, feel the inflation, are going to go out and vote on the economy. They've been pushing the economic message, all through the months leading up to this election day. As far as Democrats are concerned, they're hoping that the issue on abortion rights, plus all of the election denialism by Republicans and their support of the quote-unquote big lie, they're hoping that that energizes their base and gets them out. And right now, it's all about which party can get their voters out to the polls.
Steve, always excellent reporting. Your insight is great into this situation. So let me just say, Steve Reddish is an executive producer with VOA News Center. Many Africans are curious about the U.S. midterm elections, and in Kenya, Mohammed Yusuf spoke to people on the streets of Nairobi to find out what they know about Tuesday's election, as well as their thoughts on U.S. electoral process.
Following U.S. midterm election and comparing with other countries like here in Kenya, I think it's a bit easier there in America. Because here in Kenya, we do our election, all the 6 elective posts together. But there, they stagger them. meaning that there is continuity in the elections. But one thing I don't support much is about how they conduct their presidential election. We have the popular vote and electoral college votes. Majority have their say, the popular vote, they will vote. Then the electoral college vote will decide. I think they should give more weight to the popular vote. The popular populations will decide, not the electoral college vote. Yes, the electoral system in America, it is much more advanced in that there is too much openness. Everything is open, everything is transparent. Mainly it is the media who do the tallying and they lay out the results. You see the losers and the winners, they all agree with the result, meaning that there is too much transparency, there is openness. To me, it's the best.
Yeah, I've been following the US politics and also the election and the kind of the arrangement they have. The presidential election is conducted separate from. These are the elective positions. That's for Congress, Senate, and other positions. And that's the best system that maybe we can also emulate. So the US electoral system is one of the best in the world because we have the electoral college and also we have the common vote. So for someone to win as the president, first you must win the common vote and then also the electoral college vote. So all the states in the US have got specific electoral college number of votes, like maybe the largest is California, we've got Texas and others. So this is the best system maybe compared to us where we conduct election for Senate and presidential the same. So it's a better system and we can choose from that.
Okay, America being the one of the most powerful nations in the world and the electoral policies that they put in place, the electoral infrastructure and all that, I think it's the best with a lot of democracy in play that all other nations will enact to make sure that the electoral process is very fair. Okay, for the midterm elections, it's much not easier to follow because most of us tend to focus so much at the presidency, that being the powerful seat in the US. We just focus on the presidency that much. So for the midterm elections, I think it's not easy to follow.
That was Mohammed Yusuf speaking to residents of Nairobi. Now to Tanzania, where a special mass funeral was held for the 19 people that lost their lives in Sunday's plane crash into Lake Victoria. Tanzanian Prime Minister Kassim Majaliwa says that at least 26 people have been rescued. This includes 22 passengers and 2 flight attendants. Flight PW494, operated by Tanzanian airline Precision Air and carrying 43 people, plunged into the water in stormy weather as it tried to land at Bukoba Airport. Fishermen rushed to the scene in boats and some swam in the lake to help rescue trapped passengers and recover bodies. Crash survivor Mctrida Samuel recounted the harrowing ordeal.
As we were landing, there was bad weather. We had a big crash, and I immediately started seeing water enter the plane. Passengers started to struggle to rescue themselves. The only thing that helped me until I survived was that I managed to remove my seatbelt and get out of the seat on time. But the plane had already flooded with water, so I struggled to swim up, and that's when one of the cabin crew members helped us open the emergency door. After a few minutes, local fishermen came to rescue us when we got out.
Police say the aircraft was flying at about 100 meters when it encountered problems and bad weather. We'd like to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, the latest on the United Nations Climate Conference ongoing in Egypt. We'll be back.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, We're following the US midterm elections and we'll discuss what the possible outcomes may mean for the way the United States engages Africa. We'll also discuss COP27, a UN climate conference that is underway in Egypt. It's exploring ways to lessen the impact of the climate crisis on African countries and the rest of the world. Join me, Heidi Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
In other news, United Nations Human Rights Chief Volker Turk is calling on Egypt to immediately release Alaa Abdel Fattah, a jailed political dissident who has been refusing food and is now refusing water too. Zimbabwe has launched its first ever nano satellite into space in a bid to help collect data to monitor disasters, boost agriculture and enhance mineral mapping. And Kenya Airways is planning to cancel its bargaining and recognition agreements with about 400 members of the Kenya Airline Pilots Association, saying their current strike is unlawful. The pilots walked out over pension contributions and a settlement of deferred pay. World leaders are delivering speeches on climate change Tuesday, and conference delegates are delving into negotiations on compensation. Among African leaders who spoke was Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa, Botswana's President Mokgweetsi Masisi, and South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, who urged developed economies to honor their commitments because failure to do so breaks trust and confidence in the process. The U.S. sought to reassure the UN Climate Summit in Egypt Tuesday that it will stick to its energy transition even if Republicans triumph in midterm elections. The COP27 talks have been dominated by calls for wealthier nations to step up their commitments to cut greenhouse gas emissions and fulfill pledges to financially help poorer nations green their economies. It's time for a health report.
It is estimated that by 2050, climate impacts could cost African nations US $50 billion annually. The Horn of Africa region, including Kenya, is experiencing the worst drought in 40 years. 2 consecutive years without rain have visited misery on millions of people.
Greater progress would be made on our climate goals were it not for the albatross of illegal economic sanctions imposed on our country. We demand the immediate lifting of these unwarranted and punitive sanctions.
Drought is another permanent feature in Botswana which continues to deplete the little resources we have for socio-economic development. This has prompted the government to develop a drought management strategy to assist in resilience building to mitigate loss and damage as well as mobilize resources. This will, however, not be enough without innovative adaptation funding systems. I wish to urge the UNFCCC to rethink adaptation financing. For effective implementation of adaptation actions, the project-based approach will not yield the intended results.
Our continent will need a predictable, appropriate, and at-scale funding stream and technological support. This must support our right to development, international equity and transmissions that are just and inclusive. This then places a great deal of responsibility on developed economies to honor their commitments to those countries with the greatest need and countries that confront the greatest environmental, social, and economic effects of climate change.
It's time for Health Report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu with climate control news. Hello, Lino.
Hello, Esther. Well, climate disasters are causing devastation worldwide, and experts say the change in climate is projected to increase threats to human health, particularly in lower-income populations. Take a look. Mudslides in South Africa, flooding in Nigeria, and record drought in the Horn of Africa are just few weather-related disasters that observers say communities have experienced this year in Africa due to climate change.
My house is flooded. My community is flooded. People are suffering. No drinking water. No light. In fact, it's a terrible situation.
Research by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reveals that the change in climate can affect people's health directly, including death and injury in floods and storms. Climate change also impacts people indirectly, with changes in the ranges of disease vectors, water quality, air quality, and food availability. High water stress and lack of clean water mean an increased risk of contracting waterborne illnesses. Climate disasters can also cause drought, displacement, and lead to hunger.
I've never seen a drought like this before, because there is no place to work for our kids, but we pray to Allah to overcome this drought.
The UN warns that about 3.6 million people in Somalia are at risk of starvation. Some 12.4 million people in the Horn of Africa, including Somalia, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Djibouti, are affected by drought, according to the United Nations.
Two-thirds of our patients who come, especially children, are severely malnourished in the hospital. We have a lot of cases with respiratory tract infections. We have a lot of cases of diarrhea.
The World Meteorological Organization estimates that 215 million people will be affected by climate disasters by 2030, and less than half of the African population, one of the most vulnerable to climate change, has access to early warning systems to help cope with these disasters. As the world warms and extreme weather events mount, governments and corporations have been called on to address climate change. Experts warn the planet's temperature has already risen by about 1.1 degrees Celsius, and the effects are only going to get worse with every additional tenth of a degree of warming. Scientists and officials agree that it's important to not make matters worse by burning even more fossil fuels that emit heat, trapping gases into the air. And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter at Lino Mudu. Esther, back to you.
And thanks, Lino. Be sure to watch Lino Mudu's health reports every Tuesday on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.